The radar picture over the Strait of Hormuz at 4:47 a.m. showed 31 contacts. The CIC watch officer had classified each one: 12 commercial contacts transiting eastbound, 7 westbound, 4 anchored in the waiting area south of Qeshm Island, 6 fishing returns near the Iranian coast, and 2 surface contacts logged as IRGCN patrol vessels holding position 3 nautical miles northeast near the Bandar Abbas approaches. Dense and familiar. The strait at 4:47 a.m. was exactly what it looked like every morning. At 4:48 a.m., the picture changed in a way that took 3 seconds to fully register. 3 new contacts appeared on the radar, not on the surface, but above it. The air picture showed 3 low-altitude contacts emerging from behind Qeshm Island's radar shadow, bearing 025, altitude estimated at 600 feet, speed 110 knots. Track, direct intercept with the destroyer's position. Bridge, CIC. 3 new airborne contacts bearing 025, altitude 600 feet, speed 110 knots. Classification probable IRGCN UAV. Contacts on direct intercept heading. Time to overhead, 9 minutes. The officer of the deck processed the report in the 2 seconds it took him to reach for the intercom to the captain's sea cabin. UAVs, not aircraft. Not a fast pass. UAVs moved at 110 knots, which meant they didn't cross overhead in 2 seconds and depart. They arrived and they stayed. 3 UAVs at 600 feet 9 minutes away, and the Seahawk helicopter was currently on the flight deck undergoing a pre-mission inspection that the crew chief had begun 11 minutes ago. That detail, the Seahawk, the timing, the 11 minutes, would become significant in approximately 4 minutes. At 4:50 a.m., the captain stepped onto the bridge. He walked to the radar repeater and studied both the surface and air pictures for 20 seconds. He noted the 3 UAV contacts, their speed, their altitude, their bearing. He noted the 2 IRGCN surface contacts 3 nautical miles northeast that had been in their holding position since before the watch began. He noted the Seahawk status. He turned to the officer of the deck. "I have the con." Then, "What is the Seahawk's current readiness status?" "Pre-mission inspection. Estimated completion in 14 minutes. Emergency launch was possible, but required explicit authorization and deferred checklist items that introduced risk tolerances the captain would have to accept explicitly. Notify the crew chief. Hold the inspection. Stand by for possible early launch. Do not interrupt the current checklist. I'll decide launch status in 4 minutes. CPA to UAV formation, 6 minutes and 40 seconds. The Mohajir series UAV, the most likely classification for 3 slow-moving contacts at 600 feet from IRGCN operational waters, was not a precision munitions platform in this context. It was a surveillance asset and a presence tool. 3 Mohajir UAVs in formation at 600 feet served specific purposes: real-time video relay to IRGCN command ashore, persistent documentation overhead, and this was what the captain had registered in the first 5 seconds: occupation of the airspace directly above the destroyer at an altitude that made concurrent Seahawk operations unsafe. A Seahawk operating in shared airspace with 3 UAVs of unknown collision avoidance behavior was a fundamentally different calculation from a Seahawk operating in clear air. The IRGCN knew this. The timing, UAVs emerging from behind Qeshm 11 minutes after the inspection began, suggested the IRGCN had observed the helicopter's status from elevated shore-based positions. The airspace corridor was being closed before the surface component of the operation had been revealed. At 4:51 a.m., the surface picture changed. The 2 IRGCN surface contacts holding northeast simultaneously ceased holding. Both accelerated to 38 knots in a diverging pattern, one bearing down on the destroyer's port bow, one on the starboard bow. From 3 nautical miles northeast, both contacts were at the destroyer's position in approximately 5 minutes. Bridge, CIC. IRGCN surface contacts underway. Contact Delta bearing 018, speed 38 knots. Contact Echo bearing 039, speed 38 knots. Closing from both bow quarters simultaneously. CPA estimates Delta 400 yards, Echo 350 yards. Time to CPA 5 minutes. 5 minutes. 3 UAVs overhead in 6 minutes and 40 seconds. 2 fast attack boats at the bow quarters in 5 minutes. All elements coordinated to within 90 seconds of each other. This was the geometry. UAVs blocking the Seahawk's operational corridor overhead while surface elements closed from 2 directions below. If the UAVs established presence before the Seahawk launched, the helicopter's options became constrained. If the Seahawk didn't launch, the fast attack boats arrived at bow quarter positions without the primary non-kinetic response available. The captain had 4 minutes before the first decision point. He stood at the center bridge window and read the tactical display the way experienced commanding officers learn to read it, not one element at a time, but as a whole. He had already classified the operation. The UAVs existed to deny the Seahawk. The surface contacts existed to threaten the hull. The timing existed to force decisions before the captain had established which decision was most important. The IRGCN had constructed a moment where the U.S. commanding officer was forced to respond to 4 problems simultaneously, and where each response to one problem potentially compromised the response to another. The captain had noted this. He had also noted that the construction had a specific vulnerability. It required all 4 elements to maintain their coordination. If one element failed to perform its intended role, the geometry of the other 3 became less effective. He had already identified the element most likely to fail. He was waiting 4 minutes to confirm the analysis. Get me a status update from the crew chief in 60 seconds. Exact checklist position. At 4:52 a.m., the crew chief reported Step 14 of 22. Standard completion in 11 minutes. Emergency launch in 4 minutes with items 17 through 22 deferred. Items 17 through 22 included rotor blade, leading edge inspection, tail rotor assembly torque check, hydraulic fluid level confirmation, and emergency flotation system arming. None of these, if deferred, made the helicopter unsafe in calm sea state. All of them, if defective in flight, had consequences ranging from serious to catastrophic. The decision to defer was a bet, and the captain was the one making it. CPA to surface contacts, 4 minutes. CPA to UAVs, 5 minutes and 40 seconds. The first friction event arrived in the voice of the electronic warfare operator. Bridge CIC. EW contact. Fire control radar emissions, bearing 027. Platform identity consistent with IRGCN patrol vessel. Signal strength suggests range under 2 nautical miles. Source is not one of our tracked contacts. A third surface contact. Not previously tracked. Not broadcasting AIS. A vessel that had been stationary, below the radar's movement threshold or in a clutter zone near the Iranian coastline, had activated its targeting radar without appearing as a moving contact on the display. It existed as a radar emission only, a weapons sensor confirming it had eyes on the destroyer and was in posture to use that information. 2 fast attack boats at 38 knots from the bow quarters. 3 UAVs 5 minutes from overhead. A stationary contact with active targeting radar at unknown close range. The geometry had a 4th dimension, and it was invisible. CPA to surface contacts, 3 minutes, 20 seconds. At 4:53 a.m., the next data point arrived. The UAV formation simultaneously descended from 600 feet to 300 feet. At 300 feet, the UAVs were no longer above the Seahawk standard patrol corridor. They were in it. An operating Seahawk at 200 to 300 feet would share airspace with 3 UAVs at 300 feet at night in the Strait of Hormuz with navigation lights that were, based on prior documented IRGCN UAV operations, unreliable for collision avoidance. The descent to 300 feet answered the question the captain had been waiting to ask. Tell the crew chief, do not launch. Complete the inspection on standard timeline. Seahawk is not launching until the UAVs have cleared the operating corridor. He had acknowledged the IRGCN's move. He had also already planned past it. The Seahawk's non-launch was a temporary posture, not a permanent outcome. The IRGCN had correctly identified the helicopter as the key U.S. non-kinetic tool and had moved to neutralize it by occupying its airspace rather than by any action against it. That was a professional move. The captain noted it and moved to the next problem. CPA to surface contacts Delta and Echo, 2 minutes, 40 seconds. The targeting radar contact to the northeast had not moved. Its emissions had not ceased. Whatever it was, it had been watching since 4:51 a.m. and had not stopped. It was present, persistent, and unexplained. The destroyer's electronic warfare suite tracked it continuously. CPA to surface contacts, 2 minutes. At 4:55 a.m., the captain authorized the radar system to enter active tracking mode on both surface contacts, not on the UAVs, on Delta and Echo. The fast attack boats were the mobile element with approach geometry that required a targeting solution now. The tracking solution was confirmed on both contacts simultaneously. Both boats' electronic warfare equipment received the emissions within seconds. The CIWS completed its power on and entered passive thermal tracking mode on Delta, now at 1,700 yards and still closing at 38 knots. The barrel oriented on Delta's thermal signature and followed. No authorization to engage. CPA to Delta, 1 minute 50 seconds, 1,700 yards. The UAVs reached overhead at 4:55 a.m. at 300 feet. Through the bridge windows, looking up at a slight angle, the crew could not see them. UAVs at 300 feet in darkness were visible only as navigation lights, and the IRGCN navigation lights were intermittent. The radar had all three clearly. The bridge crew had 3 intermittent light sources overhead that moved at 110 knots and were not commercial aircraft. The warm Gulf air at 4:55 a.m. carried the faint smell of petroleum and salt that existed nowhere else on Earth. Someone had left the starboard wing door open a centimeter. Through it, the specific smell of the strait at this hour. The dark water. The navigation lights of the commercial traffic still transiting without knowledge of what was converging around the destroyer. The second friction event arrived in the communication suite at 4:55 a.m. The IRGCN had activated a radio frequency jamming system affecting the UHF tactical net, on which the destroyer coordinated with its assigned maritime patrol aircraft, a P-8 Poseidon at altitude 80 nautical miles to the southeast. The jamming was precise. It targeted the specific tactical band, not the encrypted satellite channels used for communication with 5th Fleet in Bahrain. The communications officer reported at 4:56 a.m. UHF tactical net is jammed. Switching to backup frequency. Estimate 60 to 90 seconds to re-establish P-8 contact. Delta was at 1,300 yards and closing at 38 knots. In 90 seconds, the geometry would advance by another 1,700 yards. The captain acknowledged the report without turning from the surface picture. He had already planned around the P-8 being unavailable. The jamming removed a capability. It did not remove his options. CPA to Delta, 1 minute 10 seconds, 1,100 yards. Through the port bridge windows, Delta at 1,100 yards in the Gulf darkness, lit by its own wake and the phosphorescence of bow wave spray at 38 knots. Less a visible object than a disturbance in the water, a brightness moving toward the ship at a speed that made the distance feel shorter than the number suggested. Echo through the starboard windows in the same way. A wake, a speed, an intent. The captain watched Delta's bow wave and approach angle, reading the geometry for the signal that would distinguish collision course intent from harassment position intent. At 38 knots and 1,100 yards, that distinction would present itself in 70 seconds. At 4:56 a.m., the laser dazzler received authorization to activate on Delta. The dazzler swept Delta's bridge windows at 4:56:40 a.m. The effect was visible on the radar display within 15 seconds. Delta's speed dropped sharply from 38 to 19 knots. The contact was decelerating. It had not altered course, simply slowing, abruptly enough that the deceleration was itself a signal. Something had changed aboard that vessel. CPA to Delta revised, 650 yards in holding, with Delta still decelerating. Echo had not decelerated. The asymmetric response, one contact slowing, one maintaining speed, was either a communications breakdown between the two crews or a deliberate probe. Test whether the U.S. response was consistent across both contacts. Dazzler on Echo. The Dazzler swept Echo's bridge windows at 4:57 and 12 seconds a.m. Echo's deceleration was faster than Delta's, 38 to 14 knots in 8 seconds. Either Echo's crew had heard about Delta on their tactical radio in the 30 seconds between applications, or the Dazzler exposure was sufficient on its own. Echo decelerated. CPA to Echo, 580 yards stabilizing. Both contacts decelerating and holding at ranges outside collision risk threshold. Not withdrawing. But the aggressive approach had stopped. They were holding at approximately 600 yards on both bow quarters, still a harassment posture, no longer a collision course geometry. The situation had reached a plateau. 3 UAVs overhead. An unknown emitter to the northeast, still active. Jamming still in effect, though P8 contact re-established on backup frequency at 4:57:30 a.m. This was the specific type of standoff that did not have a dramatic turning point, no single moment where the geometry shifted decisively. It had a sustained condition, and the sustained condition had a cost. The CIWS had been in active mode for 11 minutes. The radar systems were operating at continuous high-demand scan rates. The crew was at general quarters posture. The Seahawk crew had been standing by on the flight deck for 11 minutes, in full gear, in the Gulf pre-dawn heat, waiting for a launch authorization that had been revised twice in the past 4 minutes. The cost of the standoff was distributed across every system and every person simultaneously. It was real, and it was accumulating. The captain was aware of it. He had been aware of it since 4:50 a.m. He had made a decision at 4:50 a.m. that the cost was worth the outcome it was protecting, and he had not revisited that decision since. He was revisiting the timeline, not the decision. At 4:58 a.m., the captain authorized the Seahawk for emergency launch on reduced standard inspection. Items 17 through 22 deferred. Calm sea state. Short duration flight. The captain accepted the risk delta. The Seahawk launched at 4:59 a.m. It climbed toward 300 feet, toward the exact altitude the 3 UAVs were holding. Shared airspace, at night, over the Strait of Hormuz. The pilots flew with full reference to all 3 UAV positions on their display, maneuvering around each contact with the careful attention of crew operating in a known hazard environment. The helicopter's radar held all 3 clearly. The pilots navigated. The Seahawk positioned on a slow orbit between the destroyer and Delta. Delta, holding at approximately 600 yards, began a slow withdrawal at 4:59:40 a.m. Not a rapid departure. A deliberate opening at approximately 10 knots. Echo, observing from the starboard bow quarter, held for 45 seconds. Then Echo initiated a matching withdrawal, bearing north toward Bandar Abbas. The tell had not been the Dazzler response. The Dazzler was an immediate reaction to a stimulus. The tell was the Seahawk's launch. When the helicopter entered the airspace, despite the UAVs at 300 feet, when the IRGCN understood that occupying the operating corridor had not prevented the Seahawk's operation, the surface element's tactical logic became untenable. The airspace denial had failed. When the denial failed, the surface contact's primary protective asset was gone, and the geometry of their position became a liability rather than a posture. At 5:01 a.m., the Seahawk positioned directly below the lead UAV at 250 feet and activated its searchlight toward the UAV's sensor array. A $43 million helicopter directing a $1.5 million Candela searchlight at the sensor pod of a surveillance UAV actively documenting the encounter. The UAV's thermal sensor, operating in the searchlight's saturation field, received a whiteout signal. The video feed to IRGCN command ashore was blank in the relevant field of view. At 5:02 a.m., the lead UAV altered course 20 degrees to port. The second followed. The third followed. All 3 began climbing and adjusting their track toward the Qeshm approach corridor. They were withdrawing. The unidentified targeting radar emitter to the northeast ceased its emissions at 5:03 a.m. Without the surface contacts in position and the UAVs overhead, the solution had no operational context. Whatever platform had been maintaining it returned to passive. By 5:05 a.m., the surface picture was normalizing. Delta and Echo at 2,400 yards and opening. UAVs climbing through 800 feet tracking northeast. The unidentified emitter silent. The P-8 fully re-established. The Seahawk held position for 4 additional minutes, documenting the withdrawal on camera before the captain authorized recovery to the flight deck. No one on the bridge spoke for a long moment after the helicopter began its recovery approach. The helmsman's hands remained at 10 and 2. He had not adjusted the heading during the standoff. He had held the transit course through 3 UAVs at 300 feet overhead, 2 fast attack boats inside 600 yards on both bow quarters, an unidentified targeting emitter at unknown range, and 17 minutes of simultaneous multi-axis pressure assembled before the ship's crew had finished their pre-dawn watch routine. His hands were at 10 and 2. They had not moved from the course. The course had not moved. The officer of the deck rolled his shoulders back once. The elevated physical awareness of the past 17 minutes had lived in the body as well as the mind, and the return to normal posture happened physically before it happened consciously. He adjusted his collar. He looked at the picture. The contacts were opening. In the CIC, the electronic warfare operator closed the unidentified emitter's track at 5:03 a.m. and labeled it Unidentified Stationary Emitter, NE Bearing, Emissions Duration 11 minutes, no weapons employment. 11 minutes. It had been watching for 11 minutes and had never needed to do more than watch. Its purpose was to be noticed. It had been noticed. The captain had filed the information and proceeded correctly in spite of it. The crew chief completed items 17 through 22 on landing. All items were within tolerance. The captain turned from the center window. Resume normal watch rotation. Seahawk crew to debrief. Crew chief to note deferred items and outcomes in the inspection log. Encounter report per 5th Fleet Protocol. Jamming incident report separately to J6. He paused. Electronic warfare operator, good catch on the emitter. He walked to the chart table. Confirmed position. Ahead, open water and a carrier group 12 hours away. Someone had placed a coffee on the chart table edge. He found it still warm. He was briefly surprised. He drank it. Good watch. The record assembled here speaks in the language the ocean keeps. 3-axis non-kinetic pressure operation, 3 IRGCN UAV platforms, 2 fast attack surface contacts, and 1 unidentified stationary targeting radar emitter. Coordinated to a 90-second arrival window. Executed in the Strait of Hormuz at 4:48 a.m. UAV contacts, 3 Mohajer-class platforms. Final altitude at overhead arrival, 300 feet. Duration of overhead presence, 14 minutes. Purpose assessed, airspace denial to delay Seahawk launch. Seahawk launch delayed, 4 minutes. Seahawk launched into UAV-occupied corridor. Yes. Surface contacts, 2 fast attack boats. Maximum closing speed, 38 knots. Minimum CPA achieved, 580 yards. Laser dazzler activations, 2. Both contacts decelerated within 15 seconds. Both contacts withdrew following Seahawk launch. Unidentified targeting radar emitter, active 11 minutes. Range estimated under 2 nautical miles. No weapons employed. UHF tactical net jamming, active 9 minutes. Backup frequency established within 90 seconds. P-8 coordination maintained. Seahawk deferred inspection items 17 through 22, all within tolerance on completion. Course. Alterations made by U.S. destroyer, 0. Speed reductions under pressure, 0. Transit heading maintained throughout. Yes. Degrees yielded from course, 0. 3 UAVs. 2 fast attack boats. 1 ghost emitter. 1 targeted jamming event. 17 minutes. 4 simultaneous pressure vectors coordinated to 90 seconds. The Seahawk launched into an occupied corridor. The Dazzler made the fast boats reconsider. The Searchlight made the documentation equipment reconsider. The Strait remained open. The transit continued. The picture is on the record.